Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister and asks, how many times since November 2008 has he spoken with blogger Cameron Slater on the phone, and how many times, if any, has he texted him?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, none in my capacity as Prime Minister.
Order. 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 When I remain on my feet, I don't expect interjections to continue from my left. Supplementary question, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the Prime Minister's previous statements to say that he regularly talked with Mr. Slater on the phone, is the Prime Minister now claiming that when he talked with Mr. Slater, he was talking with Mr. Slater as the leader of the National Party, not as the Prime Minister? And does he wear a different hat when he takes those phone calls?
Mr. Speaker.
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
I'm not now claiming that. That's always been the claim.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Did he call Cameron Slater to discuss the backlash Slater received after describing a young car crash victim as a feral who deserved to die? If so, what did he tell Slater about the dead man's mother?
Mr. Speaker.
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I've never run Cameron Slater in my capacity as Prime Minister.
Supplementary question, Chris Hipkins.
Mr. Speaker, has he ever phoned or texted Cameron Slater on a phone funded or provided by ministerial services?
Right,
Speaker,
Honourable Prime Minister.
I'm not 100% sure of that, but what I can say is that's not the, as Prime Minister Helen Clark will have told him, that's not the test of whether it's in my capacity as Prime Minister.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Dr. Russel Norman.
Mr. Speaker.
Order. Order. I don't need the Leader of the House assistance at this stage. Dr. Russel Norman's point of
Mr.
order.
Speaker, the Prime Minister gave an answer to the primary question on notice on the basis that he never called Mr. Slater as the Prime Minister. We've now established that there are occasions where he used the Prime Ministerial phone to call Mr. Slater. I would ask you to rule as to whether the Prime Minister's original answer was within the standing orders of the House, given that he himself has now acknowledged he used a Prime Ministerial phone to call Mr. Slater.
Order. Order. In regards to the answer given by the Prime Minister to the first question, that answer was definitely in order. Point of order. Right, Honourable
Mr. Speaker, there's something particularly disturbing about the Prime Minister's answer, because it would appear that any minister can make this claim and say, not in my capacity as a minister. Now, round about now, we've got no accountability at all in this Parliament if you allow that to stand.
Order. Yeah. In regards to the very first question that was asked, the Prime Minister is perfectly entitled to answer it the way he did. He's then responsible for that answer. Further supplementaries have been asked which attempt to tease this issue out. They're equally in order. Further supplementaries, Dr. Russel Norman. Supplementary question, Dr. Russel Norman.
Why did he tell Cameron Slater that the dead man's mother was the same woman who sometimes confronted him at Pike River meetings?
Order. Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to describe conversations I have in capacities other than those as Prime Minister.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Was Cameron Slater correct when he said that the Prime Minister told him that the dead man's mother, so this is the Prime Minister's own words, the Prime Minister said, quote, the dead man's mother was, quote, the same effing feral bitch that screams at him when he goes to Pike River meetings. Is Cameron Slater correct that that is what the Prime Minister said?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I made clear at the time that was not correct.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Isn't it the truth that until the Dirty Politics book came out, he chose to have regular dealings with Cameron Slater, a man who is a hired gun for the tobacco industry, whose blog subjected a public servant to death threats, and who celebrated the death of a car crash victim, calling him a feral?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, over the time I've been Prime Minister, the answer to that question is no.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr Russell Norman.
Is it appropriate for the Prime Minister or his staff to use an attack blogger like Cameron Slater as a platform to, quote, get their message out, end quote, as the Prime Minister's spokeswoman described it on the 12th of December last year?
Right Honourable Prime
Mr Speaker, the government and ministers do talk to bloggers for a variety of reasons. The reason we talk to social media is they are part of the overall media that communicates with New Zealanders. That will be no different from other political parties. I've seen that member quoted on numerous blog sites. Or one assumes that he and his office talk to them, and I'm sure he and his office probably talk to Nikki Hager.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question, Dr Russell Norman.
Did he instruct his staff to cease all links with Cameron Slater after the blogger accused an alleged sexual attack victim of bringing it on herself, or after Slater described a car crash victim as a feral who deserved to die? Did the Prime Minister direct his staff to cease all contact with Cameron Slater after Slater made those comments?
Right Honourable Prime
Mr
Minister.
Speaker, no.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr Russell Norman.
Does he not think that he should set a standard for the Prime Minister's office by directing his staff to cease all contact with the attack blogger Cameron Slater after Cameron Slater accused an alleged sexual attack victim of bringing it on herself, and Slater described a car crash victim as a feral who deserved to die? Would it not set a standard for the Prime Minister's office to direct his staff to no longer have contact with Cameron Slater?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, well, I've made it clear that we don't endorse many of the stories or comments that are run by a range of different bloggers, but no, I won't be instructing my staff to do that.
Supplementary question, Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Is he saying it is business as usual for the Prime Minister of New Zealand and his staff to deal with on a regular basis with the most vicious and notorious blogger in New Zealand, and for his staff to leak information to that blogger in order to intimidate public servants and silence his political opponents?
Right Honourable Prime
Mr Speaker,
Minister.
I don't believe that to be an accurate statement.
Speaker.
Point of order, Russel, please.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I ask after question time that you review the overall question here today, because I suspect this issue is going to arise again around the distinction between the Prime Minister's other capacities and his capacity as Prime Minister. And the issue that I'd like you to consider...
Order. This is a point of order.
The issue that I'd like you to consider is that, in fact, it is the content of the communications, not the means by which they are transmitted, or the hat that the Prime Minister claims to be wearing at the time that he makes the communication that's at issue here. So if the Prime Minister is communicating with someone about matters relating to his role as Prime Minister and about activities he has undertaken as Prime Minister, then they are by nature prime ministerial activities that he should be answerable for. So I ask you to give some further consideration to the interchange today, and in fact perhaps come back with a more substantive ruling on the matter, because it seems to me that if the Prime Minister could stand up and give any answer to any question and say, well, I wasn't doing that as Prime Minister and therefore would not be held to account.
I'll hear from the Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I think it's been well established in this House for a very long period of time that Prime Ministers wear a variety of different hats. That includes as Leader of the National Party and can include as a citizen. I fondly remember sitting in this House for years hearing Helen Clark saying that she made statements or conversations or undertook actions as the Leader of the Labor Party. I happen, for the record, to use my ministerial service funded cell phone to ring my wife. When I ring my darling wife and I put the cat out at night, I do that in my capacity as a husband, not as Prime Minister.
Order. 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 I'm on my feet. Thank you. In regards to the very first point Chris Hipkin raised, I certainly give an assurance I will review the interchange today. As to the appropriate course of action following that review, I won't be bound. If it's necessary to come back with a further, more substantive ruling, I will consider doing so. Point of order, Dr. Russel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order. This is a point of order. Order. This is a order. This is order. We just need to get the rules straight for everybody. This is a point of order, and it will be heard in silence. Dr. Russell-Norman.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for that ruling. Given that it related to my questions, I would just like to make one point with regard to the point that Mr. Hipkins made, which was the issue was about the John Key acting as Prime Minister.
Order.
The point of order is that it's relevant to this question because he was acting as Prime Minister in the Pike River capacity.
Order.
That's why it's relevant
Order.
to this question.
Order. The point's not the attempt to raise a point of order is not actually adding to the situation. I've given assurance following the conversation, the point of order raised by Chris Hipkins. I will have a look. I always review the transcripts of question time as to what action may then be required will be determined by the conclusions I make in that review. Is it a fresh point of order? Because I've dealt with this matter. If it's a fresh point of order, I'm happy to hear it, but we're not going to relitigate this matter any further.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is it a fresh point of order?
Yes.
Point of order, Dr. Russell.
Mr. Speaker, while you were on your feet, and several times while I was trying to make a point of order, the Prime Minister interjected even after you had directed him not to. Now, it seems to me that if we are going to have order in this House, it's very important that the Prime Minister in particular should set an example of not speaking while the Speaker is trying to speak.
And that is a reasonable point of order to be raised. I didn't actually hear the Prime Minister continuing a conversation. I did hear it from another front bencher of the government, and the member is making a fair point. I don't want to get into a habit of evacuating many members on any day, but points of order should be heard in silence, and particularly when I call the House to order and ask for the point of order to be delivered, for members to continue to interject is going to create problems and leave me with no choice to ask that member, be it a minister or a Prime Minister, to leave the chamber. Question number 4. Phil Twyford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Building and Housing.